Tensions are running high between demonstrators and federal agents on the streets of Portland, Oregon. The two groups clashed Friday night into early Saturday morning. Officials say protesters launched fireworks at a federal courthouse, and agents cleared them out with tear gas. The Trump administration deployed federal officers to the city, supposedly to protect federal monuments and property. But the mayor and governor and other officials are pushing back, accusing the agents of abusing their power. For more on this, I'm joined by Rebecca Ellis. She's a City Hall reporter for Oregon Public Broadcasting. Rebecca, you've been covering this situation for several weeks now. Can you give us a sense of the feeling on the ground and tell us a little bit more about what these protesters are demanding?
Yeah, so these protests have been going on since the end of May. They've been largely peaceful gatherings, but there have been these nightly clashes between law enforcement and protesters. But since President Trump sent federal officers into the city, they have really exploded. Last night was the biggest crowd I can remember seeing, even from the first day these protests started. There were 3,000 people there. And so the energy is really high, and you'll sort of see maybe around like 11 p.m. midnight, there will be, shaking of the fence that's been put up around the federal courthouse, and people will chuck water bottles, maybe throw fireworks, light small fires. And the federal officers will routinely respond with disproportionate force. There was tons of tear gas last night, flashbangs, less lethal munitions shot at protesters to disperse. And that has kind of become a nightly event here over the past 2 weeks. They've been sent. In terms of what protesters want, I think right now top priority is getting these federal officers out of Portland. Protesters do not want them here. But as I've said, these protests have been going on since May, and protesters have been making the same demands I think we've seen protesters in cities across the U.S. make. They want to see the police department further defunded. A lot of people want to see the mayor who oversees the police department hand over the bureau to another commissioner who's been a longtime advocate for police reform, new training when it comes to use of force, de-escalation. So similar demands. I think the difference here is just these protests have been sustained for so long.
And regarding use of force, we know that Oregon's Attorney General asked a federal judge to stop these federal agents from making arrests during these demonstrations, but the judge denied that request on Friday. What can you tell us about that ruling?
Yeah, so the judge basically said the state lacked standing to bring the case. They said they didn't have enough evidence that these patterns of federal officers arresting protesters without probable cause was widespread enough, and that there was a real pattern there. Just a reminder, that lawsuit was filed in part because of reporting that showed federal officers were removing protesters, placing them in unmarked vans, detaining them without probable cause, kind of whisking them away and releasing them later on. But the judge basically pointed to these two accounts of that happening that had been widely reported in the news and were in the lawsuit filing, and said, look, you don't have a pattern here. It's not enough for a temporary restraining order.
Okay, so not a pattern and a practice. But both state and local officials have said the presence of federal agents is escalating tensions and have called for those federal agents to be removed because of that. There, as you mentioned, there have also been those allegations of people being taken off the streets and put in those unmarked vehicles. Has there been any response from the Department of Homeland Security on any of these allegations?
Yeah, I mean, they've said they're only targeting and arresting people who've been identified as committing a crime. And they've said routinely, I think the most recent time was in a press conference a little early this week, Acting Secretary of DHS Chad Wolf said, look, we are here to defend federal property. We have the jurisdiction to do that. It doesn't matter that, the mayor, the city council, the governor have asked us to leave. We have a right to defend this property. We are not going to retreat. We don't need an invitation. So they've made it pretty clear they are staying while their property is under attack, as they say.
And from your reporting and your research, what do you believe is the legality of these arrests that we're seeing? Are they within the legal parameters of what federal agents should be doing while they're deployed in the city?
I have definitely seen some arrests where I have not seen the protester. I look like I wasn't watching the whole time, but to me, they looked like they were without probable cause. I mean, there are also protesters that are clearly there to antagonize. But federal officers, what we've widely seen is that they've responded with sort of disproportionate force. So yes, I'm sure there are arrests that have probable cause. I also believe there's some that seem excessive.
Interesting. Rebecca Ellis, thank you.
Thank you.